All right. Yep. Let's continue. So I'm Reetta Mietola from the University of Helsinki, and I'm representing All Youth Research Project here, and I'll be talking about All Youth Research Project a teeny tiny bit what it entails, and then I will go into our research findings. And I will be talking about the Finnish context. So our research has been and is being funded by the nyt se näyttää punasta, enkä mä saa sitä vaihtumaan. Okay. Yay! So it's our research is being funded by the Strategic Research Council at the Academy of Finland. And the point of this kind of funding is that we need to produce solutions for different kinds of societal problems within Finland. So we have been focusing on the Finnish context in whatever we do. So I will be talking about Finland, but I think you will find some connections to what already was discussed here while Tommy was talking. And the good thing is that I'm not going to mix two countries with each other. So just concentrating on Finland then. Yeah, I can fail in other things. Okay, our project has been running since 2018. So this is like the final year of All Youth Research Project. So we have quite a few findings already, and the project is called All Youth. All Youth want to rule their world, and we are doing research on capacities of young people and also obstacles that hamper their engagement with society. And there are some themes that have been sort of running through so responsible governance, of course, rule of law, digital innovation, and bioeconomy. And these themes come from the different disciplines that are involved in this. So we have people from the Faculty of Law involved, people doing digital science, like Jari and Gunnar, and myself. My background is in education. But I would say that in this project I've been doing youth research plus disability studies. So it is a big mix of people coming from different disciplines working together. We work in 3 different universities in Finland, and as I said, we've been funded by Strategic Research Council. This also means that we have to talk with politicians, people like officials working in different kinds of ministries, collaborate with them. We've been doing our research in a way that we've been working with young people, but also different kinds of organizations, officials and so on, working in different parts of Finland with young people. So we try to do this like it's often said that researchers are sitting in their ivory tower. Well, we didn't have that chance, and I really don't that researchers do that anymore anyway. We have 5 sub-projects with specific focuses. So the project that I'm leading, we have been focusing on barriers and resources for youth participation, and especially looking at how young people from minority or marginalized positions can participate in political discussion and in policymaking. Then there's a project in Tampere focusing on young people's wishes and dreams for sustainable development and equity. There's the project focusing on innovative digital models and services. There's one focusing on legal obstacles and one on sustainable well-being and young people's employment opportunities. But at the same time we have had these focuses, we've been working together. And this is what this presentation is about. I try to bring together findings that keep repeating in different sub-studies. Nyt se näyttää taas punasta. Tää mun nyt. Okay. And I'm going to say something about participation. So as Tommy said, it can be a very wide concept, and actually in our project we have approached it in a very wide way. So we have been looking at different kinds of ways that young people contribute to society, and about their dream, how they want to contribute to society, but also obstacles. But in this particular, because the theme of the workshop is focused on political participation, I will focus on political participation. And with political participation, as Tommy said, it is about intentional action that young people do to express their views about society and to actually act to change society accordingly, like Kielakoski, Gretzel and Nivala have been writing about. It is about influencing decision making. It can be in different levels. It can be in schools, it can be at the municipality level, in your local community, municipality, but it can also mean that in the national level. And we have different kinds of structures at different levels that are supposed to make it possible for young people to take part. For example, schools have their student councils. I hope that's the right term. But then also we have, at the municipality level, we have the youth councils. We also have some children's parliaments in some cities, and so on. So we have different kinds of structures. And in this particular presentation, I'm gonna try to talk about our findings and about like what we found. What are the main barriers? What are the what are the ways that young people want to take part? How we have studied participation. I would say that we have like more than 1,000 young people have been taking part in our different kinds of studies. Can be even more than 2,000 young people. We've done multiple surveys. For example, we had a survey in a kind of magazine directed for youth called Demi. That doesn't exist anymore. But it used to be a very sort of like popular magazine, especially with young women. So we had a survey there about like climate change and sustainability and so on, and almost 1,000 young people answered that survey. We have also done different kinds of surveys and discussed with young people in different kinds of events. For example, Jari and his colleague Ika went to Assembly, which is a gaming event in Finland, big gaming event. And then there's been a Vaikuta Day. It's like an influence day for ninth graders organized by Tampere City. Ninth graders are the last sort of 15-year-olds. And so the whole sort of age group goes to this Vaikuta Day, and our researchers have been collecting data there, talking and young people have been filling in these surveys. We've had different kinds of workshops, some of them using the World Cafe method that will be used here as well. So kind of like discussing with young people to find out how they think about participation and how they want to participate and what kind of obstacles there are. We've done interviews with young people, life history interviews in different cities with different kinds of groups. Co-research, which means that young people have been working as researchers in some of the sub-studies, and thus they have been producing data, for example, in interviewing their sort of peers, which is kind of like, it provides you different kinds of research material when a young person is talking to a young person. But then again, the idea in co-research is that also that the co-researchers can actually influence the frame of the research. So it's not us middle-aged people who decide what is being asked from the young people, but the young co-researchers actually have been involved in thinking about what we want to know. And then there have been some small ethnographic studies where we have been following, me and my colleague have been following the different kinds of projects, courses that have been organized for young people to sort of like encourage them to participate in society. So we have been taking part in these events and writing field notes, talking with the young people, and also interviewing them afterwards. And what I want to say is that these kinds of methods where you're actually interacting with young people, they are particularly important when you're doing research where you also want to include those young people that you would consider as being vulnerable. Those young people who might not read Demi, or even if they're reading the Demi magazine, they wouldn't think of answering a survey. So you kind of like need to go to the young people and talk with them. And I think the more sort of marginalized group of young people it is, the closer you need to go, the more time you need to spend with them to actually figure out how they feel and think about this society. And that has been especially important in our research. So, for example, one research group located in Tampere, they have been doing interviews with young people who have been using the safe Red Cross Safe House, which is a kind of like shelter for those young people who need a place to stay for a night. They might not be permanently homeless, but they might have such a bad situation at home with their parents or something that they really cannot stay there, so they come to the shelter. So these and often these young people are, because their life situation is very, very stressful, then they have different kinds of sort of like needs for support and so on, and the shelters try to help them with these things. So it is a very different view of this society and participation than somebody who is in a municipal youth council, so representative of the youth. They're usually those young people have lots of resources and also strength to take part in that kind of actions. The ethnographic studies are ones where the activities that we have followed have been targeted to young people coming from different kinds of minority groups. So that has been our sort of explicit aim to get the voice of these groups. And when I'm talking about vulnerable young people, I'm not saying that some people are sort of definitely vulnerable because they belong into, for example, some sort of language minority. I'm referring to that their life situation currently is such that they are in a vulnerable position. Or when we're talking about, for example, bullying, online bullying, being a certain gender, coming from a minority, you're more vulnerable to be target of bullying than somebody else. So I'm not saying that if you have a certain kind of background that you're definitely vulnerable, but it depends on the context and life situation. Did you have a question? Where's the mic? Okay.
I'd like to ask you about the first thing that you said about young people being involved in the decision making.
Yeah.
Would you say that young people should be able to decide everything for themselves, or do you think there are some issues that the older generation should be able to decide based on their experiences and maybe their more mature self and their more, let's say, objective point of view in some points?
Mm-hmm.
What would you say about that?
I would say, what Tommy was saying, that young people feel that even if they try to participate, they are not heard. Nothing changes. So my big concern and lots of concern in the research is from the democracy point of view. So if young people feel that they are kind of like sidelined all the time, they will turn their backs to democracy, and that's something we don't want them to do. The other issue is that there are some questions that I feel there's a big generation gap in how for example, in Finnish Youth Barometer, there are very few of the young people answering are denying climate change. And they say that this is one of the most urgent things that we need to tackle. And it's a totally different situation when we look at the older generations. So in that sort of decisions, young people sort of like need to have a bigger voice, because it's going to affect their whole lives. I've been born into a generation where everything was possible for me, and now those well, probably your age, even younger, they need to sort of like, they have boundaries, even sort of like ecological boundaries of how they can think about their future lives. And I think they need to have a bigger, in this issue, they should have a bigger say than 60, 70-year-olds who are used to sort of like having everything and even more.
So basically what I was trying to say, I agree with what you said, of course. Young people should not be able to not have a say, decide about every aspect of their life and consequently the society. So what I would ask, what would happen if, let's say, a specific young voice was heard, and because it, let's say, represents the young audience, most young people agreed with that voice. Do you think that this would be something that would say, okay, now because most young people agree with that young voice, we need to do that, we need to implement that idea? Do you think that's something that would be appropriate to happen just because most young people agree?
Question of representation is a big question in any democratic process anyway. So I think we need to think about this question as part of the whole sort of where we're developing new ways of doing democracy. For example, having these sort of like different kinds of practices of deliberative democracy, where sort of like where people where we're kind of like trying to produce an understanding of what is best for everyone, kind of thing, and it is really sort of complicated. And there's all young people don't agree with sort of like, probably there's nothing that everyone agrees on. It's like people have different stands, just like us middle-aged people have different kinds of stands. But it is a question of whether it is like when Tommy said that there's these 3 conditions that need to be, whether it is just sort of like including, because there's lots of, in our data, there's lots of this sort of like irritation and sort of like young people are just sort of like tired with sort of like being invited to come and talk, and then nothing happens. So there needs to be sort of like something changing after the involvement. Okay, let's, if I can. Yay! Okay, I want to start with this when we go to findings. This is because we have lots of money, so we do stupid things. So we were working with a artist who does cartoons, and we tried to get into this strip the kind of like one key argument of so something that was coming up in our data and in our research. And what this represents is that you cannot sort of like, many of you cannot read Finnish, but basically there's young people talking about taking part in talking about politics, like everyday talk, maybe at the schoolyard or something. Then there's young people protesting, and then this young person comes home from the demonstration, and the male person asks, well, where have you been, what you've been up to, kind of like a bit negative way. And the press says like, why aren't the young people voting? And politics is not interesting for young people. So basically there's this sort of like, there's this adult concern about young people not participating. And then what we have been doing is that young people are actually, they would like to participate, but there's plenty of barriers. and those who are really active, and that's the most, I think, one of the most interesting thing for me was that it's always like, yeah, there's these active young people, but what about the rest? But even the active ones are giving up, basically. What Tomi was saying about the climate activists, that they are being bullied and even sort of like in a very heavy way. They just sort of like turn their backs on the whole political process and so on. So there's this sort of like sort of mixing, and this is what we bump into every time that we go and talk with some person from somewhere, sort of like who's maybe not that involved in this discussion and in the development work of youth participation, but they have this sort of assumption. They have the assumption that the only problem is that we need to activate young people, and what I'm going to go through is that young people actually think that that's not the biggest problem. Okay. So I'm going to go through some barriers first, and then something about how young people actually want to participate. One thing that keeps repeating in our different kinds of studies in different sub-projects is that young people feel that there's lack of safe spaces to talk about politics, to deliberate, to discuss, to find out about things, to build your own stance and build your opinions. So they feel that it's not safe to discuss this. This came up already earlier on here in the discussion, that there's bullying, whether it's online, whether it's face-to-face situations, that it is scary to talk about politics because currently everything is just so polarized. What's also important to note that it is not as risky as for everyone. So especially if you are a young person going online and trying to talk something, already your age is something that can be attacked. Then there's the question of gender. If you're a if you have a gender or sexual minority status, ethnic or racialized minority status, or if you have a disability, that gives even more sort of like basis for somebody attacking you. So especially, I was doing research in a workshop where there were 10 young people coming from different kinds of minorities, working together, trying to find a sort of something that they wanted to voice out and do something about it. So what came up in the discussion was that even if these are all of the young people had experienced discrimination, bullying, and so on. They were young people who had like they were kind of recognizably belonging to some minority. For example, color of your skin, wearing some sort of traditional clothes or something. The experiences were so constant and so heavy that they were physically scared of going and into a public space to sort of like do a flash mob. That's what the young people decided to do. They decided to arrange a flash mob about like how what kind of harassment, how public spaces are not safe for everyone. And this is a young person talking about how it felt like difficult because to go and do the flash mob because it's a difficult and personal topic, but it also wasn't easy for them to stand there and hold a sign and like saying like, look at me, I'm the target of discrimination. So basically, being there in a public space and talking about politics is really scary for those people who are daily sort of like trying to avoid situations where they can be harmed psychologically. So, but it's kind of like, even if some people, this is a very important question for especially these kinds of persons coming from different kinds of marginalized groups. It is a person affecting, I would say, all young people and their sort of like how willing they are to actually express their political views. No. The second one was that not one big barrier was that even if Finnish young people have been scoring like super high when there's been these studies studying their skills and knowledge of society and democratic structures and how to participate and everything, even if they score really high, they feel that they don't know enough. So young people feel that you need to be really knowledgeable to talk about politics, to take part, even to vote, that there's this threshold that you need to really know which party, who you vote before you can actually vote or talk to anyone about voting. And this is a problem on its own, of course, like if you don't feel that you know, but it is a problem also if there's like going back to the safe spaces, if there's nowhere where you can actually talk with people and try to understand politics, talk with your peers in schools or anything, if that doesn't feel safe, then how would you actually become this knowable person? Like what Tommy was saying earlier on, that about the doormat, that you should invite people over to deliberate, to talk about politics, to think about politics and think about society and build your views and everything, and not expect that people have to know already before they actually enter the sort of like these political forums. There's one young person who has been interviewed who's saying that they're really interested in politics and societal issues, but doesn't really want to form any personal opinion because they feel that they don't understand enough. And this person, for example, hadn't voted because felt that they didn't have strong enough opinions about politics. Then in Finland, as Tommy mentioned, we have been, like in many of your countries, there's been different kinds of things done to actually build these structures for youth participation and different kinds of practices for youth participation. But even in research, we would say that there's a gap in looking at different kinds of marginalized or minority groups and their participation. So what also comes up in our research is that many of the formal structures that exist, for example, student councils or so on, that young people don't feel they don't feel that they are accessible, but in practice they are not accessible. So they're not for everyone. One is that you have to sort of like one is the knowledge thing, that you have to already be very sort of like knowing, but also fluent in expressing your views and so on. So you need to sort of like been trained into this sort of like political talk and a political process. But also, for example, that are there stairs or a ramp? What kind of language is used? Can somebody who doesn't speak Finnish as their first language actually take part equally in those processes and so on? So there's like the formal structures already have they're not accessible. Then another thing that is a barrier for those coming from different kinds of marginalized or minority groups is that there's these stereotypical expectations concerning these groups and their political interest. So, for example, what Tommy was saying about social participation and political participation, I do disability studies, so I would say that most of the activities that different kinds of disability organizations organize for disabled young people are focused on social participation, because it's such a big sort of like, in that field, it's such a big issue. It's like people being alone and not finding peers and everything. And they totally forget about political participation. So there's already this sort of like expectation that this isn't a relevant question for disabled young people, the whole question of political participation. But also when a person with a disability, for example, when they enter politics, what is expected is that they would also only talk about their issues. For example, a disabled person is only interested about disability and disability politics. And that is like infuriating for those young people. My other project is focused on disability activism, and in my project, like long-term disability active, Amu Urhan is working as an expert. And what she says, she's been taking part in party politics for ages. She's very sort of like influential in one political party. And what she's saying that even if people around her respect her and everything, if she opens up her mouth on an issue that is not disability, some people don't even hear. So she is considered only as an expert of disability, even if she's like really wants to make a bigger change in this society. But then there's also the question of that you have to name yourself. So if other people aren't boxing you, you need to box yourself. So you need to sort of like state your identity. And this might be really difficult for somebody who, for example, is not really sure about their gender identity. Really difficult for young disabled people. That keeps coming up, that you cannot really be a disability activist unless you first kind of like get in touch with the idea that you're a disabled person and sort of like start understanding how this society treats disabled people. So it is a barrier for some people that they need to basically name themselves and box themselves before other people box you. And all of these problems are related to the sort of like dilemma of representation. So as you said, like if one young people has an opinion that many young people agree with, do we need to take that? We definitely need disabled young people, people from racialized minorities, people from different kind of sexual minorities saying their views about. But if they first need to sort of like first they need to be like, oh, I'm disabled, and then they need to sort of agree into people not hearing anything but their disability. But also, this is from one interview of a disability activist, and what they are saying is that there's like lack of, in disability organizations, there's lack of this sort of training that you would be comfortable in political participation. You would know these things and become sort of like fluent in taking part. So it's not only the stairs to the student council or so on that are seen as barrier, but also sort of that you don't get the skills because you're not involved in these sort of things. Social class is also a big issue. So when you look at the research, it kind of like that comes up. So usually those who are really good at talking about politics also are good at doing other things, and because of their family background.
I have only a good intention to understand what you said like previously, to not give opportunity, but you said that we need people from racial minorities, we need people with disabilities, we need people from, let's say, that suffer from gender dysphoria, etc. My question is, isn't this discrimination? Because you're saying that we need these people because they are in this disabled group with, let's say, these issues. Like, why do we want people based on their background, either is a gender background or I don't know, like cultural background, and instead why don't we choose people based on what they have to offer, their abilities, their skills? Why do we need people from the categories that you mentioned?
That's how democracy works. That's how representative democracy works. But also, last week we in my other project we organized kind of like utopia workshop for disability activists, and their utopias were kind of like, there were lots of elements that would sort of like, for example, like climate change needs to be stopped, and there that your sort of like how work and money is organized and everything. So I ended up asking them, like, how do you see that? Do you see that maybe you don't need a separate disability movement? So you don't need disabled people to actually do the steps toward or roll toward that utopia. But could this be done as part of some other sort of other movement? And what they were kind of like, no. And then they started to talk about how there had been a Pride March, which was totally inaccessible, even if they have been stated that they would, because they don't understand what accessibility is, how wide a thing it is. So basically, one thing is that do I, as a middle-aged, able white woman, understand what it is to be in this, what it is like to be in this society as a disabled, non-white person? Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, for sure, you don't understand. I don't understand. People who are not in their position, we don't understand.
Yeah.
But what we can do is, of course, make an effort to listen to them and put aside every emotion or whatever personal side we have to try to understand them. But what you said about inclusion and having representative categories of people, don't you think in that way you exclude some people that have more skill, that maybe can offer more to the table and a better quality of work? Because, I mean, okay, these people, they are not in these categories, but maybe they are more they have more skill. So why you have to exclude them?
Yeah, but if you think about like people, if you take any study of who is studying in a university, what kind of people end up being in parliaments and everything, there's an overrepresentation of people coming from upper classes, people coming from privileged positions. So it just doesn't work, basically. For now, because this is the reality where we live, I would say that that's the more democratic solution, is to actually think about how different groups get their voice heard in the system. I don't say that the parliament should be full of, Finnish parliament should be full of disabled people, but on the way to where the decisions are made and where these sort of like how the processes go, there needs to be representation, because definitely those people who are working there in disability organizations, they say that if they don't do the work, nobody does. So that's just the reality right now. Then there's all these sort of like philosophers that have this sort of like veil of ignorance and so on, but that's a utopia, and we have to work with what we have now. Microphone.
I mean, in my opinion, the answer to this question is very simple, because we have already enough of privileged people being in the political system and in the governments, in the European Parliament. And you can see like the example of the Greek parliamentary, the Eva Kaili, that we have had a lot of people like this who are corrupted in the system, and you can see at the same time like the other Greek parliamentary, the Konstantinos, who is in the wheelchair. He has a lot of problems, and he had this opportunity to be there and represent a lot of people. That he's a brilliant mind, but he's in a wheelchair. But he has the same opportunities as Eva, who is corrupted and take a lot of money. So you see the answer, you have it here in your eyes. Like, we need people like this to give them the will to help them and improve the society.
Yeah.
This is the most important. Like, this is to be inclusive and democratic, as you said. Not having all the time rich people be on the political system.
Yeah.
We are enough of this, and nothing changed.
I'm gonna move forward so that I can say something about. I have 1 minute. Okay. I'm gonna say something about how young people participate, or how they want to participate. So I think it's interesting, important to, so because we have this sort of like, also like somebody was saying that we're trying to make participation fun. Yeah, that's all good, but is that what young people actually want? And I will come back to that. Yeah, it is, but let's see what it is like. So I took lots of time to sort of like separate social and political participation. So, but actually, when we look at how young people participate, they don't do the separation. Like what Tommy said, that's something where you're taking part in some sort of like, for example, some sort of NGO, some activities. You might go there for just to spend time with your friends, and then you end up actually, it influences your thinking, it influences your feeling of that you can actually do something, and you end up doing things. So they're not sort of separate. And also, when we have been asking young people, this is from the Demi surveys, that there's all of these that were on Tommy's presentations, the different ways of participating. Food choices, buying clothes from flea markets, recycling plastic, and also would like to write opinion pieces. So different kinds of ways of participating. So it is kind of like young people are really flexible, I think. And even if, and thank goodness they do think that voting is the most important way, it is also really important to recognize that they don't do this kind of boxing of things, that something is sort of like political participation, other isn't. It's also important to sort of like that they're in their life, political talk is kind of like that there's different forums, so there's no distinction, like definite distinction in between the face-to-face and online. So these are also fluent spaces where you can sort of like talk and so on. Of course, you need to remember the question of safety. What also comes up is that things need to be personal. You need to personally feel that something is important in order for it to sort of like there's this motivation, but also that there is this change, that you actually do something. Same things that Tommy was saying, the three conditions. So this is an example of a discussion that was taking place after in that workshop after the flash mob. So the idea is that there's this feeling of actually doing something, influencing things, and that the issue that we brought up was a big issue. So societally meaningful issue. So young people are asking for meaningful participation, not just participation because participation is what is wanted from young people, but it actually links into their own lives and it makes a change. What also comes up, keeps repeating in our research, is that young people are acting and doing politics together, and this is their way of what they want. Of course, doing like online also sort of like, well, maybe me as a sort of like Facebooky middle-aged person think that of being online is like going solo. But for young people, it can also be, for example, young disability activists are talking about how they build these networks. They wouldn't call it a group of activists, but it is a network where they help each other, support each other, and you don't feel as lonely with your opinions. And if there's bullying, then there's this sort of like network that can actually support you. You can also get technical help, you know. So there's collectives, networks, and it's really, there's also this low threshold, especially online, where you can like something or share something. So you can express solidarity with a quite kind of minimal sort of like issue. Minimal sort of like effort, but it is also important. It is important, like who you support, what you share. It's a sort of like, kind of like that's also part of building your political identity. And then one thing that comes up is that for example, in an ethnographic study, the young people were just having so much fun. They were just sort of like talking. There was sort of formal, sort of like, for example, there was like journalists from big media houses were coming to talk about young people, about media and politics and everything. So they were nicely listening and asking questions. But then when the formal sort of like program ended, they were just talking and talking and talking about different kinds of political parties, how they had been reading party programs and so and so on. This is an this discussion happened in a sort of like they had this sort of a camp where they were working on media content, and this is young women talking about how they follow politicians on Instagram, and how they found it like relatable that the politicians are talking about everyday things, about like how they buy vegan pudding or something like that, but also that they thought it was like cute that older politicians were acting just like young people online. So that's like fun, and still it is about politics. They're talking about party politics, but in a youthful way. Yep. I think that was it. Thank you. I'm gonna be here this evening. I'm gonna leave tomorrow, lunchtime-ish maybe. But if you have any questions or you want to talk, and so please. Thank you.